जब कोई अपने बहुत प्रिय चले जाते हैं, व्यक्तिगत रूप में प्रिय है, लेकिन जिस आंदोलन के साथ सब जुड़े हैं और भी प्रिय है, तो याद आता है उस पल को जब हम लोग सुने कि सफदर हाशमी के ऊपर इस प्रकार का हमला हुआ, कातिलाना हमला हुआ पूरे जन्म के ऊपर, जिसमें सफदर बहुत बुरी तरह घायल हुए और एक मज़दूर उनके साथ राम बहादुर भी घायल हुए। मुझे याद है, और मुझे खबर मिली सुहेल हाशमी से, उनके भाई से। हम लोग सब ट्रिवेंड्रम पार्टी कांग्रेस में गए थे, हमारे सीपीएम की पार्टी कांग्रेस में। सुहेल डेलीगेट थे, हमारे पार्टी के होल टाइमर होते थे, और मैंने उनसे पूछा कि तुम्हें कैसे पता चला। कल परसों मैंने उनसे पूछा तो उन्होंने कहा कि मेरी तबीयत ठीक नहीं थी, तो मैं रैली से बाहर निकल के दफ्तर जा रहा था और वहीं मुझे खबर मिली कि सफदर के साथ ऐसे हुआ। और सुहेल ने ही हम लोग सबको बताया, किस हिम्मत के साथ उन्होंने बताया, और हम लोगों को ऐसे लगा उस समय जैसे एक अंधेरा छा गया है। और सुहेल और कॉमरेड जोगिंदर प्लेन में आ गए, हम लोग तो ट्रेन में थे। और मुझे याद है अलीगढ़ स्टेशन पर जब वो ट्रेन रुकी, तो शायद अगले कैरेज में दूसरे साथी आए थे अलीगढ़ बताने के लिए, तो एक साथी ने आकर हमारे कैरेज की खिड़की के सामने खड़े होकर बोले कि सफदर नहीं रहे। और हम लोग एक्चुअली एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे थे, क्योंकि जिस समय ये पता चला कि इतने घायल हुए हैं, हमें भी लगा ये बचेंगे कि नहीं बचेंगे। लेकिन आज जब हम 29 साल के बाद याद करते हैं, मैं खुद ही अपने को सोचती हूँ कि इतना इमोशन आज भी कैसे जग रहा है मेरे में। क्यों? 29 साल बीत गए हैं। लोग कहते हैं कि समय हील करता है हर वुंड को, लेकिन आज की दुनिया में सफदर जैसे इंटेलेक्चुअल, जिसने कभी भी अपने राजनीति के साथ कॉम्प्रोमाइज नहीं की, कभी भी अपने असूल सिद्धांतों के साथ आगे रखकर कभी कॉम्प्रोमाइज, उनकी दिमाग में ये बात थी नहीं कि एक इंटेलेक्चुअल को कैसे बैलेंस करना चाहिए। सफदर एक पार्टीजन थे, एक योद्धा थे, एक आइडियोलॉजी के लिए, एक विश्वास के लिए, समाजवाद के लिए, लेकिन प्रोपेगेंडिस्ट नहीं थे। वो क्रिएटिव आर्टिस्ट थे। और जो विष्णुप्रिया जी ने कहा कि उनकी आर्ट, उनकी प्रतिभा, ये बात सही है। एक व्यक्ति के सामने सामूहिकपन हमेशा है, ये बिल्कुल सच्चाई है। और सफदर पहले शख्स थे जो इसमें, जिसका अटूट विश्वास था इसमें। लेकिन साथ साथ ये भी बात थी कि व्यक्ति का जो रोल है, मुझे लगता है सफदर ने उसको प्ले किया है। और मैं ये कहती हूँ कि अगर सफदर का विरासत आज जिंदा है, वो उनके साथी जन्म के कारण है। जिस हिम्मत के साथ, जिस बहादुरी के साथ उस समय भी जन्म ने तमाम कठिनाइयों को पार करके खड़े हुए, मुझे लगता है हमारे इतिहास में शायद ऐसे मिसाल है, शायद ऐसे मिसाल है, जब 2 दिन के बाद वही ग्रुप, जब 2 दिन के बाद वही शहीद के पार्टनर खड़े होकर वही नाटक करते हैं। कितने लोग कर सकते हैं? मुझे नहीं लगता है कि ये बहुत कॉमन है, ये बहुत अनकॉमन है। और इसीलिए मैं समझती हूँ कि जो सामूहिकपन है, जो कमिटमेंट है, वो जन्म में हम पाते हैं। और जन्म ने, और जो ये सब नौजवान और जो नए साथी जुड़ रहे हैं जन्म में, मैं आपको सलाम करती हूँ, क्योंकि आप लोग जुड़ रहे हैं ऐसे समय में जब आपका जुड़ना ही एक बड़ा संघर्ष है। आपका जुड़ना ही एक रेजिस्टेंस का एक सिग्नल है, आपके आना ही एक रेजिस्टेंस का एक झंडा है। तो मैं समझती हूँ कि आज अगर सफ्दर देखते आप सबको, वो कितने गर्व करते कि एक समूह, एक कलेक्टिव जो 1973 ने जन्म लिया, आज 2022 में वही कमिटमेंट, वही बहादुरी, तमाम कठिनाइयों को पार करके आप लोग काम कर रहे हैं। और इसीलिए जो आप लोगों ने इस विरासत को जिंदा रखने का जो रोल अदा की, आज मैं जन्म के साथियों को भी सलाम करती हूँ और शुक्रिया अदा करती हूँ कि आप उस संघर्ष को जो कल्चरल पॉलिटिकल एक्शन के रूप में विष्णुप्रिया जी ने इतने सुंदर तरीके से उसको रेखांकित की, उसको आप लोग जिंदा रख रहे हैं। और इसलिए जन्म को शुक्रिया और जन्म को मेरा सलाम। साथियों, आज का जो विषय है द पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ हेट, नफ़रत के संबंध में और नफ़रत आधारित राजनीति, और ये एक ऐसे विषय है जिसके बहुत सारे पहलू हैं। तो आम तौर में मैं कभी भी लिखित भाषण, कभी भी नहीं कहूँगी, लेकिन कब देती हूँ लिखित भाषण, लेकिन मैंने सोचा क्योंकि इतने सारे मुद्दे हैं इसमें और इतने सारे उसके पहलू हैं, मैंने सोचा कि मैं लिख कर ही आपके सामने इसको पेश करूं। दिक्कत की बात है कि ये लेख जो है ना वो इंग्लिश में है, लेकिन सानिया और विष्णुप्रिया आपकी इजाज़त से और आप सबकी इजाज़त से अगर आप राजी हैं तो मैं आपको पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ हेट के संबंध में जो कुछ पॉइंट्स मैं रखना चाहती हूँ, मैं पढ़ के जो मैंने लिखा है सुनाना चाहूँगी, अगर आपकी इजाज़त हो तो। थैंक यू। So dear friends, today we are discussing the topic against the politics of hate. Now, what is the definition of politics of hate? I think legally, so far, according to the United Nations, there is no real definition accepted globally of the politics of hate. But according to the United Nations, in June 2019, and I'll quote from that document, in the wake of what is defined as a global increase in xenophobia, racism, intolerance, violent misogyny, anti-Semitism, and anti-Muslim hatred around the world, the United Nations felt it important to produce a document called Strategies Against the Politics of Hate and Hate Speech. So in that, there are some definitions of hate and hate speech, which I think are relevant for us to understand today. What they say is, quote unquote, on hate speech, hate politics, and their advocacy. Quote, hatred and hostility are seen as intense and irrational emotions of opprobrium, I hope I pronounced that right, intense and irrational emotions of opprobrium, enmity, and detestation towards the target group. The term advocacy is to be understood as requiring an intention to promote hatred publicly towards the target group, and the term incitement, किसी को भड़काना, उसका जो परिभाषा है, to statements about national, racial, or religious groups which create an imminent risk of discrimination, hostility, or violence, and they define hate speech as public speech that expresses hate or or encourages violence towards a person or group based on something such as race, religion, sex or sexual orientation. तो इससे हम लोग ये समझ सकते हैं कि जो यूएन या अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पैमाने पर जो परिभाषा है हेट पॉलिटिक्स और हेट स्पीच का, वो एक जेनेरिक टर्म है। वो केवल एक टारगेट ग्रुप का नहीं, वो कई मुद्दे पर या कई आधार पर वो प्रकट हो सकता है। तो जब हम लोग हेट स्पीच को समझने का प्रयास करेंगे हिंदुस्तान में, ये अनिवार्य हो जाता है कि हिंदुस्तान में आज हेट पॉलिटिक्स, जनरल हेट पॉलिटिक्स नहीं, हमारे देश में आज पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ हेट का क्या रूप है और उसके क्या जड़ है, that is what we have to understand in a very particular context. And also we know that hate politics is not new to our history. Before independence, post-independence, we have seen so many different reflections of hate politics. For example, on the issue of caste. Now, caste is not a category which has been included in the UN definitions. But if you look at it in India's context, I think the caste system is one of the biggest institutions which have created the whole structure of hate politics in India through the ages. But when we talk about hate politics in India today, आज की हेट पॉलिटिक्स में क्या अंतर है, ये हमें बहुत और उसके लिए आपको एक पॉलिटिकल अंडरस्टैंडिंग बताने की ज़रूरत है। इसमें हेट लव का सवाल नहीं है, सवाल है हेट की परिभाषा को समझने के लिए हिंदुस्तान में आपको एक पॉलिटिकल समझ बनाने की ज़रूरत है। You can't just describe it in terms of hate for something and love for something. So what is that? So today there are two aspects which we have to look at. One, hate politics in India is not just by this or that group, or contradictions and conflicts, sometimes violent, between this or that group, which we have seen. Today, hate politics in India is practiced by those in power, by the government in power. The RSS-BJP venture, the joint venture which is in the central government today. And further, using their parliamentary majority, or you can say misusing their parliamentary majority, it is not just the government, but it is the different structures of the state itself which is being suborned towards this goal or towards this vehicle of hate politics. Hate politics is not the goal. Hate politics is the way to meet the goal. So to understand the hate politics, we have to know what is the goal. And that is what the specific political and economic agenda of those in power today to change the very nature of the Republic of India and to convert it into the hindutva Rashtra as defined by various ideologues of those in power. Now, I deliberately use the word hindutva Rashtra as opposed to the word Hindu Rashtra, because I believe that hindutva is the political project to use religious belief among Hindus to manufacture an exclusive national identity based on religion. Now, the man who Modi ji is most inspired by, Golwalkar, you read his book now, in which he says, he talks about scavenging and how it's an inspirational thing to do. And that book is dedicated to Golwalkar. But anyway, to come back to Golwalkar, this is his quote: to understand the agenda. Hate politics is not the goal, as I said. What is the goal? In this country, Hindustan, the Hindu race, with its Hindu religion, Hindu culture, and Hindu language, Sanskrit and its offsprings, Sanskrit, as you know, being the language of the upper caste, complete the nation. All those not belonging naturally fall out of the pale of what is national. Now, if this is the understanding of what the goal of hindutva is, the establishment of a hindutva rashtra, well, clearly, this is in direct conflict with the Constitution of India, the preamble of the Constitution of India, which says, "We the people of India." It doesn't say, "We the Hindus of India." It doesn't say, "We the people of this or that caste or religion." It says, "We the people of India." And this is what riles the RSS the most. Articles 14 and 15 of the Constitution, which hold all citizens equal before the law and which prohibit discrimination on the basis of caste. तो जब आप एक ऐसे गोल को पूरा करना चाहते हैं, तो आपके सामने मुख्यतः कौन सा मेन बाधा है? मेरा ये मानना है कि जब हम हेट पॉलिटिक्स समझने की कोशिश करेंगे कि बाधा उनके लिए क्या है, बाधा है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, बाधा है आर्टिकल 14 एंड 15 और बाधा है इंडियन सिटीजनशिप की परिभाषा. So naturally, to achieve this goal, the edifice of the Constitution, the basic pillars of the Constitution, secularism, democracy, social justice, federalism, unless this edifice of the Constitution is dismantled, how are they going to achieve a change fundamentally in Indian citizenship, which is equal citizenship? How can you achieve a Hindutva Rashtra unless you attack the basic edifice of the Constitution of India? And each one of these is linked to the other. Now you know, for example, that today the word secularism is considered a dirty word by those in power, and this is not my saying so, led by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, led by the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, who calls himself a yogi, led by many of the others of the BJP. They have very clearly said secularism is a dirty word. It's a word which was included during the time of the emergency, during the time of an authoritarian regime. They have moved petitions in the Supreme Court to remove the word secularism. Last week, a Bharatiya Janata Party member of parliament has moved a private member's bill to remove the word secularism. So their intent is very clear. Their intention is very clear. Attack secularism. Now, remove it from the Constitution. Arey bhai, you remove it from the Constitution. But the intrinsic nature of India's Constitution is secular, as I have just said. Article 14 and 15, the right to practice religion, the right to propagate religion of your choice. These are all fundamental characters. What the Supreme Court has said is the basic structure of the Constitution of India. So when you attack and when you want to remove secularism, it is not just a word which is abusive as far as they are concerned or abused. It is the very concept of secularism which we all know. Now, can you envisage an India which is democratic without secularism? No, there are some people who think, अरे secularism हटाकर क्या फर्क है, हमारा तो secular है ही, तो भी हम लोग democratic तो रहेंगे, हमारा democracy तो रहेगा अगर secularism हम remove करते हैं, लेकिन ये बात नहीं है. What Ambedkar has said, each and every aspect of the Constitution is linked together. So, suppose, for example, you give up the word secularism or you give up the concept of secularism, what would it mean in terms of democracy in India? I think that is something that we have to look at. That would mean the introduction of religion and religious texts to determine rights. So if you remove secularism, if you remove equality, what is going to determine it? What your religion believes, the majority religion will then be the basis for jurisprudence, governance, laws, and so on and so forth. And therefore, those who are so deadly opposed to Pakistan being a theocratic state want to exactly replicate, maybe not directly, but at least incrementally, the introduction of religious and religious texts as the basis for the Constitution of India. And you will, of course, remember, मतलब जब सारी दुनिया, सारे लोग हिंदुस्तान में कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का समर्थन कर रहे थे कॉन्स्टिट्यूट असेंबली के पार होने के बाद, किसने उसका विरोध किया, ये तो सब आप लोग जानते हैं. वो ऑर्गेनाइज़र जो आरएसएस का पत्रिका है और उनकी जो इतने लेख थे जो आज तक किसी ने उसको डिसोन नहीं किया है, जिसमें लिखा था कि भाई ये भारतीयता के अगर हमें करना है तो हमारे पास इतने कानून हैं, हमारे पास सबसे बेहतर लॉ गिवर है मनु, हमारे पास मनुस्मृति है. तो जब मनुस्मृति होता है तो ये विदेशी भावनाओं को लेकर ये जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना है ये भारत का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन नहीं हो सकता है. सो फ्रॉम द बिगिनिंग what we understand is the very concept of democracy as being equal rights of all citizens has been anathema to the not BJP, to the RSS, of which the BJP is a front of. So the point that I'm making here is that every aspect of the Constitution is linked. If you remove secularism, you are attacking democracy and democratic rights. Secularism, being a fundamental and basic structure of the Constitution, cannot be tampered with. So what is the way out for a Bharatiya Janata Party who wants the Hindu Rashtra? Pack the judiciary. Pressure the judiciary to accept such petitions which want the removal of the word secularism. Or pressure the judiciary. After all, you have the Supreme Court, which is the apex court of this country, which is supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of justice as and when the executive fails. Although, of course, Parliament should and must be the arbiter of justice, being the representative of the people of India. But legally, in our Constitution, the Supreme Court is the apex body for justice. So now, if there is a barrier in this incremental implementation of a very specific goal of changing the nature of the Indian Republic, all those who constitute barriers to the achievement of this must be subverted. Now, this is not just a question of this or that judge. This is a basic aim as to how to subvert, to reach the goal of removal of secularism. You attack democracy, and in attacking democracy, you have to attack every single institution in India which represents any part of democratic functioning of the polity. That is the point here. You cannot separate or compartmentalize the political impact of what this goal actually means. So, subvert what does it mean when the law minister stands up not once but twice or thrice to abuse the Supreme Court in the way that he has? Ministers are going to tell the Supreme Court whether to accept bail petitions or not because they happen to be against what the government wants. Ministers or the other officials, like the Vice President of India, is going to tell the Supreme Court you should do this or you should not do this. You are going to make a public spectacle of your opinions about what the Supreme Court is so that It can be followed by all your trolls on social media. What does it mean? This is what it means when I say that you cannot separate one pillar of the Constitution from another without damaging and dismantling the entire edifice. Now, whether it is the judiciary, whether it is the Election Commission of India, what happened recently? Some gentleman was appointed to the Election Commission. His name was suggested. He was a bureaucrat in the government. Within the 24 hours of his resignation, he was appointed as the election commissioner. The Supreme Court said, what is the process? Show us the files. So, if such institutions, which are part of our constitutional framework, which ensures some autonomy from the narrow political interests of the executive, are to be subverted and subordinated to the might of the government, what is going to happen to democracy in India? So you start off by saying secularism is a dirty word, and in the process of dismantling the whole concept of secularism, you destroy democracy, you destroy institutions. You destroy the very framework on which parliamentary democracy in India stands. What is happening with parliament today? It's not just a question of suspension of opposition MPs. Of course, that is an issue. You raise an issue, it's not heard, you make a noise, out you go. On every issue of concern to the people of India. There are checks and balances in the parliamentary process. There is an institution called a standing committee of different ministries, which you all know about. Today, bills are just passed in Parliament without any reference to the standing committee. So, using your power, you are attacking institutions which form the edifice of the Constitution of India. I have mentioned some of those. And I would specifically like to mention an example of how the judiciary is trying to be suborned and subordinated. And you all know what happened to Justice Muralidharan. But I want this on record. In the history of India, of course, we have seen the emergency and we have seen the way other regimes have also tried to silence judges or to, pressure them. That's all been happening. But have you ever heard of a case where a violent riot, communal attacks are going on in the capital of India, where hate speeches are made which are directly linked to that violence, where not a single FIR is filed against leaders making those speeches because they happen to belong to the ruling party of India? And when a judge of the Delhi High Court calls out the police in open court, hearing the speeches made and asking them, do you or do not consider this hate speech? He was transferred at midnight. We all know this. But do we understand the significance of this? Because I think that was really the signal as to how this government, towards the implementation of its agenda of a Hindutva Rashtra, how it deals with those and institutions which it considers barriers. So this point which I am making, that, look at the impact of this on all aspects of the Constitution. I think these are some of the examples. There are others, but I'm not going to go into all that now. And so that is the institutional aspect. Now, if you look at how this affects democratic rights and civil liberties of citizens. Now, if I object to, if I oppose, if I mobilize and organize, certain social sections among whom I work, against the government and its policies. Today in India, the Constitution gives me the right to do so. But as we have seen, those who take on the communal agenda of the RSS and the BJP are termed anti-national, urban Naxals. I mean, all my life I've fought against what I consider a completely rogue trend in left politics, which is what they consider Maoist or Naxalite or whatever it is. But today, frankly, when every single dissident is called an urban Naxal, I kind of express my solidarity with all those students who stood with banners and placards saying, look, I'm an urban Naxal, arrest me. But the point that I'm making is that democratic rights and civil liberties, now, the way that the UAPA, for example, is being used, since 2014 to 2020, 10,552 Indians, in 7 years that is, were arrested under UAPA. But among these 10,552 arrests, in all these years, only 253 have actually been convicted. You can't get bail under UAPA for years. We did an RTI in Jharkhand. We found that almost 1,000 very poor people are arrested under UAPA. A large number of them are Adivasis, all called Maoists and shoved into jail with no legal redress. So there's some, Stan Swamy was one of the people, you know, who was arrested and who died in police custody, in judicial custody or in jail custody. He was one of those who fought against this. But the point is that you have no evidence. What is made very clear now that it is totally planted evidence using the notorious Pegasus software into the computers of those in the Bhima Koregaon case. That is the so-called prima facie evidence which has been used to arrest those activists for the last 4 years, many of them. So all this is the Hindutva way towards its goal, its political goal. These are the aspects of it. And we also know that it means the stifling, the muzzling of the press, the media. And we have the dubious distinction of being 150th out of 180 countries in the World Press Freedom Index. And we know how journalists who want to be impartial are bullied, are intimidated, how media outlets or media houses are taken over by corporates to be silenced. We know all that. And this is all part of this suppression of democracy and democratic rights which have been guaranteed to us by the Constitution of India. So what do we make of all this? Now you can say all this leads to the conclusion that yes, under the BJP RSS, India is an authoritarian regime. So this is one aspect, I think, becomes very clear from the narration of the facts which I have placed before you. But does it end there? No. Because the ideological backbone to this authoritarianism is communal. And today, the entire Hindutva project is linked to the creation and manufacture of an overarching Hindutva identity, which has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with a Hindutva based on hatred of other religions. Now, I have just listed out some of the aspects of this building of the overarching communal the Hindutva identity. Very quickly, I'm just going to go through those. There are 4 or 5 aspects. I mean, the first aspect is the equation of Hindu identity as nationalism. I mean, Nehru had spoken about the difference between majoritarianism and minority communalism precisely because the communalism of the majority is linked with nationalism. And we have seen in the past so many decades how this is so very true. And the core of this ideology, as we know, of linking religion with nationalism is the theory that only those for whom the fatherland is Pitra Bhumi, is also the holy land Punya Bhumi, can be accepted as children of Mother India. So Pitra Bhumi and Punya Bhumi. And this effectively excludes Muslims and Christians from being citizens of what Savarkar described as the Hindu nation and Rashtra. And if we see the way this ideological assertion is implemented, we have seen how RSS propaganda is that Muslims naturally identify themselves with Pakistan. The demonizing of the Muslim community as being terrorists, anti-national, rapists, criminals, and so on, is all part of the propaganda to strengthen this majoritarian approach that Muslims cannot be loyal to India even though they are Indian citizens because of their religious affiliation to Islam, whose headquarters of worship is Mecca. Thus, to be Hindu is to be nationalist, to be Hindu is to be Indian. Now forget the murderers of Pansare, forget Gulbarji and Gauri Lankesh being murdered by those whose affiliation was to Hindutva ideology. Forget the Maligaon bombings, the Samjhauta Express bombings. In all these cases and more, terrorist groups linked to Hindutva ideology are the accused. Do you remember Asimanand and his revelations as to how the RSS and its leaders were complicit in all these terror attacks? He retracted it later on, but it's there on record. Forget all this. Forget that Muslims were equal partners in the freedom struggle. Forget that as part of the defense forces, they were as responsible for protecting India's security. Forget that our cultural heritage is rich precisely because it is a representation of pluralism, of so many different cultures. Forget all this. This is the bedrock of Hindutva. Its slogan of cultural nationalism is a cover for religion-based communal identity politics. And of course, we know this has also had a response and a retaliation from some sections of the minority communities who have taken to the propaganda and to the efforts of fundamentalists within their own community to manufacture the so-called Muslim identity in so many different ways, which are extremely damaging to the democratic rights of, for example, women, Muslim women. But this identity of the Muslim identity by Muslim fundamentalists actually benefits only those who are most benefited by communal polarization, which is the RSS. The second project is of colonizing and communalizing the mind. Now, the Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah, I mean, whenever I think of Amit Shah, I just see a bulldozer, frankly. I mean, really. I mean, whatever he speaks, whatever he says, whatever he represents to me is that bulldozer which is just determined to destroy everything good in its wake. So anyway, it's this Mr. Bulldozer Amit Shah who gave an open call recently to historians. You may have seen that, Vishnu Priyaji, in which he says you will have the backing of the central government to rewrite our history. Now, think of what that means. What does it mean to rewrite our history? That is, to teach our children the falsehoods and distortions that our history is a history of Hindu versus Muslim. That the Muslim in the Mughals, that they were Muslims who were coming to impose Islam on India to destroy Hinduism, rather than conquering armies successful because of local alliances with Hindu feudals and monarchs. For them, all Hindu emperors and kings are wonderful, even if they burnt their citizens at the stake, and all Muslims were evil. The caste system was nothing but a distorted division of labor done by the Muslims, that Manusmriti is the greatest law book of all time, that Khap Panchayats are benign institutions of social reform. You know, the UGC has just issued a circular to all of you. Vishnupriya, have you got it? Saying that please include the wonderful role of Khap Panchayats. Institutions which the Supreme Court has said you should prohibit. They want to glorify it. And et cetera, et cetera. So this is an assault on the heart of India, on the shared cultures, as also the distinct cultures of multiple social groups. Pluralism, distinction, diversity, not the RSS credo of uniformity. The third aspect of this creation of Hindutva identity is for the RSS one of the most difficult and complicated, which is its commitment to Varnashram on the one hand, and secondly, its attempt to build an overarching so-called Hindu unity. So how do you do that? So what is the way that they do it? I mean, it's interesting. So this is sought to be achieved by promoting identities of various castes and subcastes. For example, specific subcastes among Dalits are identified, histories of leaders, cultures, etc. are studied and used to promote a distinct identity of the subcaste and pride in that identity. However, that identity remains within the four corners of caste hierarchies. So you're proud of your Valmiki ancestor, but you remain proud at the level that you are in the toxic caste system, which is India. The commitment to the caste system is seen crudely in the Ghar Vapasi movement. Converts who are mostly coercively forced to return to the Hindu fold are inducted with their caste intact at the lowest rung of the hierarchy, whether Dalits or Adivasis. The fourth aspect of the building of this overarching Hindutva identity is also that for Hindu believers, unlike other religions, there is no one God or one holy text, such as the Bible or the Quran. So the crafting of an overarching Hindu identity sort of gets diluted by the existence of 30 crore or so Hindu gods and goddesses, each of which have their own cultures, their local ways of worship and practices. How do you build one Hindu identity when you have so many myriad local practices and cultures of believers in Hinduism? So what is being done there? This is also being flattened. And how is it being flattened? By the building of hierarchies among the gods and goddesses themselves. By the propagation of observances of festivals which were never there in other parts of India. We have never seen Ram Navami being observed in Kerala or the South. Or even, for example, even in Bengal. It was never there as such a huge cultural festival. But here you have huge amounts of money and organization being expended by those in power precisely to build this overarching Hindu identity, which actually bulldozes. And that, I think, is also a cultural bulldozer, because those festivals lead to so many other aspects of expression of belief. So this is all done within the general framework of hindutva and the Brahminical Manuvadi basis. So if this is the creation, I mean, some of the aspects of the creation of the hindutva communal identity, I'm sure there are many more. But I think one very important aspect that we have to look at is, what is the economic aspect of hindutva? I think that is very important for us to understand. And here in India, I don't know whether there are any similarities with what happened in Germany, but certainly we can say here in India, by and large, this has the backing, including the financial backing, of the most powerful business houses in India. And here is a point you may want to consider when we talk about hate politics. As far as the economics of it is concerned, it's not hate but love, the Hindutva agenda. But love for whom? It's corporate love. It's not universal love. It's not universal brotherhood. It's corporate love. I mean, what, for example, how would you describe the process of making an Indian businessman, Adani, the second richest businessman in the whole world? I mean, that's not hate, that's love. And that's a particular set of, and a framework of policies. But there is hate in that too. And that is expressed in the huge economic inequalities which exist in India today. So this is, I don't know if you can call it the Jekyll and Hyde of Hindutva. And what happens to those? What happened last year in the number of suicides? 42,000 of those suicides in India, of 1,64,000, 42,000 were of the single social group of migrant workers, of unorganized workers, of daily waged workers. 42,000 committed suicide last year. A large majority of women committed suicide last year. Who were they? Were they Hindus? Who were they? They were workers. But if you look at it through the prism of what Hindutva wants you to do, does any BJP leader stand up and say, what is the difference between a Hindu who is rich and a Hindu who is a poor migrant worker who has no other way but to commit suicide? This is a fraud of this Hindutva identity. And this is the pinnings of the economic agenda of what Hindutva is. And this also, to a great extent, conceals the universal identity of all the oppressed, the class identity. And this, of course, suits corporates. And therefore, when we look at the politics of the Hindutva agenda, we also need to see how fraudulent it is as far as even if you go by their definition, which obviously I don't, is that the large mass of Hindus ruled by Hindutva modern rajas are now part of the one of the most unequal societies in the whole world. So if you look at this aspect of the architecture of Hindutva, then we see how it is being implemented. Now, many of us, when we talk about hate politics, we see the violence against minority communities. And I would like to quote from what Bilkis Banu said when she filed her petition in the Supreme Court. She said, "The decision to once again stand up and knock on the doors of justice was not easy for me. For a long time, after the men who destroyed my entire family in my life were released, I was simply numb. I was paralyzed with shock and fear. This is not just an individual voice of a single woman. Bilkis Bano cannot be separated from what is happening to a whole community of Indian citizens. Let's not fool ourselves that we can talk about being political against the politics of hate without recognizing and accepting that a substantial population in India does not feel itself safe in this country. And everything which I have said, everything that I have related in the architecture of hindutva, how is it implemented? I have said, and we believe, you cannot de-link things. You cannot think that today minority rights or a whole community believes and is under siege without understanding that you yourself are under siege. Your country is under siege. Your constitution is under siege. The very basis of democracy is under siege. Your economic rights and social justice is under siege because minority rights are an intrinsic part of this whole edifice of the Constitution. You knock this out, you knock down the entire edifice. Please, we have to remember this. And the reason why I want to emphasize this, because there is such a large section of liberal opinion in India which believes, चलो ये माइनॉरिटीज़ के साथ हो रहा है, इतना तो नहीं हो रहा, थोड़ा कम यहाँ हो जाएगा, चलो ये तो आरएसएस की भागवत ने तो कह ही दिया है कि मुसलमान भी हमारे भाई हैं, कह ही दिया है ना, तो ये सब क्या है जो ये लोग सब कर रहे हैं, जो मार रहे पीट रहे हैं, जो खुलेआम एक पिलर पर बांध के गुजरात की पुलिस किसी को मार मार के पूरी जनता के सामने कर रही है, लोग तालियां बजा रहे हैं, ये तो एबरेशंस है, क्योंकि भागवत जी ने तो कह दिया है कि भाई मुसलमान भी इंसान और सिटीजन्स है. कितनी बकवास है. What is the reality today, my dear friends? Look at the political economy of it. Do you know in Karnataka, after this whole hijab ban, and when Muslims and others protested, in large parts of Karnataka where religious festivals have melas alongside with fairs and shops, etc., they officially passed a ban against Muslim shopkeepers to open their shops there. Do you know today of security agencies right here in the capital who are not employing Muslims because they say their clients will object if a Muslim is a security guard? Do you know the number of domestic workers today who are forced to change their name? Because if they go and work in a Hindu household, somebody or the other, if not their direct employer, somebody or the other in the building will say, "Arey, inke ghar mein to Musliman aa rahe hain." So the political economy and how it impacts the working people, that is also a very cruel reality of this whole structure of targeting of the Muslim community. And communal violence is intrinsic to this agenda. It is not the only form, but it is intrinsic to it. And I just want to say that through the years, all this nonsense about who is responsible for the violence, forget what we say. What do judicial inquiry commissions say? Through the years, I want to put this before you. Justice Jagmohan Reddy report in 1969, Ahmedabad violence. Justice D.P. Madan report on the communal violence in Bhiwandi, Jalgaon, Mahad in 1970. Justice Joseph report on Telecheri violence in 71. The inquiry report into violence in Jamshedpur in 79. The Venugopal report on violence in Kanyakumari in 1982. The Sri Krishna report on Bombay violence in 1993. And of course, the Liberhans Commission report on Ayodhya and the destruction and the demolition and the razing of the Babri Masjid. In each and every one of these cases, who have they held responsible? These are reports after inquiries and investigations. Not that nobody else was responsible, but who are primarily responsible? It is the RSS and Hindutva outfits. So violence is in the DNA of this Hindutva agenda. And it's violence primarily against the minority communities of India, the Muslims of India, although, of course, in many, many areas, particularly in Adivasi areas, we see how the Christians are being attacked. We see how churches are being razed to the ground. We see how prayer meetings are disrupted in the name of being conversion ceremonies. So yes, hatred is reflected in the anti-minority violence in which the Supreme Court itself has expressed concern in a recent petition which they were hearing in October this year. They have mentioned the climate of violence in India. They have mentioned the importance of those in power to take strong steps against hate speech and those who give hate speech. This was in October, my dear friends. And what happened a month later? There were the elections in Gujarat. There were the elections in Himachal Pradesh. There were local elections in Delhi. What did we hear? What did we see? Did they bother about the Supreme Court? Did they bother about that judgment against hate speech? The Supreme Court has said, take suo motu notice against those who are purveyors of hate in their public speeches. But what happened? I want to speak about this because it doesn't only affect minorities. Look at the way it affects every other section. And I tell you, if there was any court which had to take suo motu notice, it's not political leaders. I want to ask, why courts are not taking suo motu notice? There are laws, 153A, 153B, 295A, 506 of the IPC. All Supreme Court has listed all that, saying take suo motu notice. But when they do it, who's taking suo motu notice? And what is the best example of this? The Shraddha Walkar case. You know about that case. What did the Assam Chief Minister say? Have you ever heard of something more outrageous, more objectionable than his remarks? Vote for Modi to prevent aftabs being born in every city or living in every city. This is a chief minister of a country, of a state, making a statement like that. Aftab is a criminal. He has to be arrested, he has to be punished, he has to pay for his crime. Against that young woman, Shraddha, I don't think there's a single citizen in India who would disagree with that. But what is happening to women in this country? Every day, 86 women on an average are raped in this country. every year, over 6,500 women are burned to death for dowry. In Assam itself, the National Family Health Survey states that the highest rate of women reporting domestic violence was in Mr. Assam Chief Minister's state. Are they all aftabs? Today, the crime rate, conviction rate against women in India of crimes against them, including rape, 77% of the accused go free. There are hardly any convictions under the dowry laws. Today, 35 lakh cases of crimes against women are pending in the lower courts. 3 lakh cases of crimes against women are pending in the High Court. You want to communalize crimes against women? Are these all aftabs? On the contrary, my dear friends, if you are not an aftab, you have every hope of going free. It's because Bilkis Banu's rapist killers were not aftab. It's because the Hathras Dalit girl who was killed and raped, they happened to belong to the same upper caste as the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. That is why every rule in the book was bent to try and exonerate them from that dreadful crime. So here is where we are in hate politics, my dear friends, where the worst crimes against women or the crimes against Dalits, you communalize it. You look at the religious identity of the victim, you look at the religious identity of the accused, and then you decide whether you are going to take up the case or not. Why and how can India ever accept this? So in the implementation of the politics of hate, you have completely and utterly shown there are no betis for you to bachao with this kind of politics. And obviously, the vehicle for politics of hate is and always has been hate speech. And as we know, I mean, my petition is pending since January 2020. In fact, in response to one of my petitions, one of the judges said, if they say and make an abuse with a smile, that cannot be considered hate speech. So now, don't be surprised if you see all the hindutva gentlemen smiling and saying, "Hum to kal aapko maar dalenge." So they're all free. So how do we bring all this together? All interlinked. Hate politics is not a goal in itself. Hate politics is towards a bigger political goal. And some of the ways that this is being taken forward is what I have tried to describe today. But how do we fight against it? And here's the thing. I mean, the bad news is that politics of hate is a reality, but the good news is that it can be defeated. It can be defeated. It can be defeated electorally, it can be defeated politically, it can be defeated socially. So when we talk about hate politics, we also have to give equal importance to the alternative visions we have as opposed to the politics of hate. Within these 4 pillars which I have described, those are not sufficient. I mean, I'm a communist, and I've been introduced as one. So I know that the Constitution of India is a constitution which has provided for the growth of huge inequalities and injustices in India. And I know that whatever socialist or whatever the inklings of socialism are in the Constitution are only in the directive principles which are not justiciable. And therefore I have many criticisms about this weak link in the Constitution of India. I want the right to work to be a fundamental right. I want the fight against inequalities to be fundamental and justiciable in the Constitution of India. I want that whatever socialists in the Constitution become part of the fundamental rights of the Constitution. But today, if I stand for the Constitution, if I say that the fight for an alternative vision which can go beyond the rights granted by the Constitution, but must always defend with the last drop of our thinking, our blood, the principles and the values of equality, of secularism, of democracy. So develop our own visions. I don't think we can fight hindutva politics by a softer version of hindutva politics. I don't think so. I don't think you can give up hardcore secularism. How you express it is different. But once you agree to a platform which you yourself use religion for political purposes, you've lost half the battle. You can't fight on that toxic ground which the BJP and RSS have prepared in this country. You can fight on alternatives, on visions, and the people will listen. And for that we need unity. One of Safdar's huge contributions at that time was the way he built a bridge between intellectuals, thinkers, opinion makers, artists, and what Vishnupriya has described as the people and the people's voices and the people's concerns. Safdar was the bridge. I mean, he believed in that bridge, and he worked towards that bridge. And I think it is that, what Ejaz Ahmed described as a structure of solidarities. We need that structure of solidarity, and each one of us has a role to play in it. Cultural artists, performers, we have to think of wider platforms in which you can draw in all those who have an important role to play in the resistance to the assault on culture in the name of hindutva culture. How do we fight it? How do we bring in historians? How do we bring in writers? How do we expand this structure of solidarities? Don't look only to opposition parties for their unity. Opposition parties, political parties, have a responsibility to the citizens of this country to defeat the RSS and BJP in what they are doing to India. But we have to be the agents of resistance among the people where we work, where we live, our relations with the people. And you are doing it. Jan Natya Manch and so many other groups, we are doing it. Let us see how today we can overcome whatever hurdles and barriers we have in our own work to build those wider and stronger structures of solidarity. I think solidarity with an alternative vision is what is going to prevent the achievement of the toxic goal. And I would say, I started off by saying the authoritarian regime. I added the corporate factor, the pro-corporate factor. So the authoritarian pro-corporate regime, and most importantly of all, the development of an identity based on the hate towards the minorities, the communal factor. So what we are resisting is a regime which is authoritarian, pro-corporate, and communal. And that is what we define as the purveyor of the politics of hate, using the avenues, the toxic words, which hurt more sometimes than bullets, which humiliate, which bully, which intimidate. And we are here, all of us together, to fight that. And as I said, the good news is that it can be fought, and the good news is they can be defeated. So once again, I pay my tribute to our dear, beloved Comrade Safdar Hashmi. I thank my comrades in Janam for giving me this opportunity to speak today on this occasion. And I thank all of you for having the patience to listen to me. Thank you very much.